Now from Trump transition headquarters in New York, Kellyanne Conway, one of Mr. Trump's top advisors. And Kellyanne, welcome back to Fox News Sunday.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
Let's start with the controversy over the call that Mr. Trump took this week from Taiwan's president, President Tsai, the first time leaders of our two countries have, to the best of our knowledge, spoken since the U.S. broke off relations in 1979. Now, you say that Mr. Trump was fully briefed, knew what he was doing before this call, which raises the question, does he intend to change our one China policy, which recognizes only Beijing?
Well, President-elect Trump is well aware of our one China policy. He accepted a congratulatory call from the president of Taiwan. That marks probably the 48th or 50th world leader that has reached out to the president-elect or the vice president-elect Mike Pence since they won the election last month, Chris. They've talked to the prime ministers or presidents of Israel, of Singapore, of Japan, of China.
But this one's different. So the question, I guess, is, does this signal a change in policy, or was it just a phone call?
It was just a phone call at this point. It signals the fact that he accepted a congratulatory call. I know that China has a perspective on it. I know the White House and State Department probably have a perspective on it, and certainly Taiwan has a perspective on it. But the president-elect's perspective is that he accepted a congratulatory call, and when he's sworn in as president and commander-in-chief in a little over a month, Chris, he will make clear what the fullness of his plans are. But people shouldn't read too much into it. And some of the press coverage, not here necessarily, but elsewhere, is really astonishing when you think about how it was covered when Barack Obama was going to try to reach out to Iran and come up with an Iran nuclear deal. And this man the president-elect received a phone call from a world leader in another country. We know about one China. He knows about one China. He's routinely briefed on these matters, and that's just what it is.
So let me ask you about this. And I think one of the reasons such a big deal was made of it is because of the fact that the president-elect has had a number of controversial phone calls with foreign leaders. He reportedly told Pakistani Prime Minister Sharif he would, quote, play any role you want me to play to address and find solutions to the country's problems, despite Pakistan's relationship with terrorists. He also spoke with Philippine President Duterte, who's been accused of ordering the murder of thousands of suspected drug dealers, which raises the question, Kellyanne, why is Mr. Trump refusing the State Department's offer to brief him before these calls, and why is he skipping the daily briefings, intelligence briefings, that President Obama gets every day?
He is not always skipping those briefings, and he's briefed by any number of credible sources on these issues. And I think people, Chris, frankly, are cherry picking about these world leaders and then they're accusing the president-elect of somehow countenancing some of these behaviors in these other places. But look, that's really unfair when you think about, we just had an election, and the opponent, Hillary Clinton, who was the Secretary of State, was using the State Department to get money from foreign governments like Saudi Arabia, which doesn't even respect girls and women. So I think people just have their hair on fire, particularly those who believe we're still entrenched in the permanent campaign, are trying to reverse the election results from last week. Let's give this man time to form his cabinet. And he's also showing respect to the current president, President Obama, who still is the president for about 6.5 more weeks, and the commander-in-chief certainly. He's not out there, but President-elect Trump is not out there making policy or announcing new policy prescriptions worldwide. He's merely taking phone calls, and he will, I'm sure, re-engage with many of these leaders once he takes the oath of office.
Kellyanne, speaking of people with hair on fire, last week you went on several of the other Sunday talk shows to express the concern of Trump supporters about the consideration of Mitt Romney as Secretary of State. Here's a clip.
I'm hearing from people who say, hey, my parents died penniless, but I gave $216 to Donald Trump's campaign, and I would feel betrayed.
I know that you say Mr. Trump gave you permission, but there's a bigger question, which is that a proper way to treat somebody who is talking about accepting a role in public service?
Well, first, the president-elect has said he gave me permission. He's quoted in the New York Times and elsewhere saying that, and that's actually true. I would not say something publicly that I hadn't expressed privately, and I would never purposely embarrass him. He has my respect and my duty, frankly, my service. So
I'm not talking about Mr. Trump. I'm talking about Mr. Romney. Is that an appropriate way to treat a guy who is just discussing public service to say people are going to feel betrayed?
Well, first of all, I'm reflecting the news, not trying to make the news. I was astonished, Chris, that in a week when President-elect Trump told the New York Times on the record he would relook at waterboarding, he would relook at the Paris Accords on climate change. He was not particularly interested in focusing on prosecuting Hillary Clinton any further because he was focused on healthcare and immigration. He understands that other agencies and individuals are charged with that responsibility. But in a week when he said that, the breathtaking backlash was really about this particular prospective cabinet member. I would turn the question around and ask, was it appropriate for Governor Romney to stick his neck out so far in attacking Donald Trump and never walking it back and never encouraging people to support the nominee once Mr. Trump had won the nomination squarely and fairly. So I've spoken my piece on that, and certainly the president-elect knows, and I've said publicly, and I will say here again, whatever he chooses and whomever he chooses has my full support and backing.
Yeah, but let me just...
and he knows that.
Let me just quickly follow up on that. Clearly, Romney is under consideration. We just showed a picture of them having dinner on Tuesday night. If Mr. Trump picks Romney, what are you going to say to those Trump supporters who are going to feel betrayed?
I'm going to say to those Trump supporters what I say to those who did not vote for the new president-elect, Chris, some of whom seem to have a hard time accepting the fact that he is their president. I'm going to say to them, you have to work together. You have to accept his judgment. And the man is brilliant. The man is the best negotiator. He's the best connector and communicator, obviously. He just pulled off the upset of a century, perhaps. And the fact is that you have to trust his instincts and his judgment, because it's what brought so many people along to his movement in the first place. And it certainly is what inspires me daily to work with him. So everyone, I hope, will accept that. And the president-elect and the president-elect alone will make the decision as to whom he should have serving him at the highest levels of government.
Let's talk about Mr. Trump's instincts, because he went to Indiana this week to celebrate, after his intervention, the fact that Carrier is going to keep 1,000 jobs in the state. Here he is.
Listen, companies are not going to leave the United States anymore without consequences. Not going to happen. It's not going to happen.
But in an editorial Friday with the headline, Trump's Carrier Shakedown, the Wall Street Journal said America won't become more prosperous by forcing companies to make non-economic investments. A nation gets rich when individuals and business are allowed to take risks as they see fit in a competitive economy. Kellyanne, I don't have to tell you, that's the conservative view of how a free market works, and that politicians shouldn't be picking winners and losers. Sarah Palin calls this an example of crony capitalism.
Well, the president-elect just simply disagrees. And if you look at what happened, this is what leaders do. Certainly what people who have been wildly successful in building businesses across the globe, as the president-elect has been. You produce, you deliver, you achieve results. And everybody looks at the result here, which is about 1,100 workers are going to stay in Indiana. His running mate, the vice president-elect, is the governor of Indiana. And I think together they worked with Carrier. And, you know, everybody's looking at it as a stick. There are carrots. There are incentives here. They worked with Carrier to find a way together to keep those jobs here and not to go to Mexico. It's astonishing to see this happen. The current president could have done it. He never did it. The president elected it even before he was sworn in. And let me just say, those $7 million in incentives, they carry over 10 years. So about $700,000 per year in incentives, Chris, as part of this deal. That's about $785, maybe $800 per worker. So people have to put this in perspective before they act like it's some type of big-footed interventionist. This guy ran from day one on bringing back manufacturing jobs from China, Mexico, and elsewhere, and he's already delivered.
I want to get into two more subjects with you. One, Harvard's Institute of Politics holds a forum every 4 years where representatives of the winning and losing campaigns get together and try to have a kind of academic review of what happened and why one side won, one side lost. Well, it wasn't that way this year. It got pretty ugly, and here are some of the exchanges between you and Clinton Communications Director Jennifer Palmieri. Here they are.
Do you think I ran a campaign where white supremacists had a platform? You going to look me in the face and tell me that?
I did. Kellyanne
really?
did. If providing a platform for white supremacists makes me a brilliant tactician. I am glad to have lost. I would rather lose than win the way you guys did.
No, you wouldn't.
Yes.
No, you wouldn't.
Yes. Yes.
That's very clear today. No, you wouldn't, respectfully.
What did you take away from that?
Well, the rest of the exchange was me telling her and her team as politely as I could that you missed America. All you needed to do was recognize that a lot of voters had a very hard time accepting Hillary Clinton as this outsider disruptor who was ethically clean and would treat all Americans fairly, had to run an aspirational, uplifting campaign that had an economic message for a lot of working America. The idea that you know what, they can say what they want about me and my team. We've got very broad shoulders over here, as you can imagine. But to besmirch over 60 million hardworking men and women in this country who became part of the Trump movement, to pretend that Donald Trump was not out there every single day, Chris, sometimes 4, 5, 7 stops in a single day, bringing his case directly to the American people and saying what to them? That we're going to reform the Veterans Administration, which leaves veterans to die, that we're going to stand behind law enforcement and the thin blue line, that he's going to create 25 million jobs over 10 years, unleash energy investment, have an infrastructure program, repeal and replace Obamacare, which has really reduced the quality and the choice and the access and increased the price of health care for many Americans, left others behind, that he's going to defeat radical Islamic terrorism in the face of Hillary Clinton referring to them as our determined enemies, and President Obama saying that they're the JV team that's been brushed back. Nobody believes that. Yep. And so to besmirch those voters is really beyond the pale to me. Now, I had already, that was a 2.5-hour forum, and you're playing a couple clips, so I had already credited them as brilliant strategists, as people I respect as professionals. That was all done. But there was no grace, there was no congratulations from them, and frankly, there's no self-awareness that they lost the election because they missed America. They blame Bernie Sanders. They blame Jim Comey. It's typical of Hillary Clinton. In Hillary Clinton's world, it's always somebody else's fault.
All right, one last thing. I'm glad to see that this was such an academic discussion. Finally, we're going to, in a couple of moments, have Jill Stein on the program, the Green Party presidential nominee, who is pushing recounts in Wisconsin, in Michigan, in Pennsylvania. What do you say to her about those efforts?
I'd say to her, give it up, as it seems like you're doing in Pennsylvania, for a very simple reason. Even your friends in the Clinton campaign have admitted that these recounts will not change any result. Hillary Clinton gained a whopping 1 vote, Chris, 1. And so I read one article, the Daily Caller, I believe, that said at this pace, Hillary Clinton could change the election results in Wisconsin in 74.5 years. I don't think America's going to sit around and wait for that to happen. The people have spoken. I was asked on this program and many others that will you accept the election results? So the question for Jill Stein and Hillary Clinton and those who just are still in the grief, anger, and denial stages, will you start moving over to acceptance and let this president-elect and vice president-elect get on with the business of government, have a peaceful transfer of power? The other thing is, I'm just astonished how Jill Stein is now the favorite flavor of the left. They ignored her and ridiculed her, and a lot of their friends in the media made sure she had no coverage and no oxygen.
I got to cut you off so I can get her on the show.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Wish her well for me, but yeah, I mean, gracious. Yeah, it's good to be gracious and to admit what you see in front of you. And in this case, Donald Trump won 306 electoral votes, 30 of 50 states, 2,600 counties.
Okay.
It wasn't even close.
Kellyanne, thank you. Thanks for your time today.
Thanks, Chris.